English and in French. But my first question will be addressed to all of you. So the first one to start, just start, okay? And then if it's a conversation with it, will be very appreciated. So Africa is facing inflation, and we have seen very high level, like 7.6% in South Africa in July, and 34% in Ghana. The US Treasury Secretary and others have called for Bretton Woods reform, fundamental changes at the World Bank and IMF to increase capital access and avoid debt cycles for developing countries. My question is, what kind of global economic governance changes do you think we need to support African growth and macroeconomic fundamentals?
Well, thank you. In a few words, Bretton Woods was established in 1945. Afterwards, we basically experienced a very different world than the one we have today. We have experienced over the centuries, but particularly after the Second World War, a trajectory of growth that has been characterized by many progress, but with two problems. First problem, climate. So we don't have a trajectory of growth that takes care of the planet. So we are now living an emergency. And second problem, we have devoted most of the innovation, most of the intellectual property, most of the research and development to accumulation of wealth. So we have 1% of the richest people in the world that have half of the assets. So this is a problem too. And they are intertwined. One is not separated from the other. So a Bretton Woods that is fit for purpose has to find a way of financing the climate transitions that we are talking about, which is not the 100 billion that is at the table when we have COP meetings, etc. It's about trillions. It's about a lot of money. And in order for us to be able to respond to that emergency, we have to have some systemic changes. From an African perspective, those systemic changes should be about us having a carbon credit, because we have not contributed to the emissions, and others having a carbon debt. How do we translate carbon credit into instruments that are going to take care of our problems, such as our sovereign debt issues and other, inflation you just mentioned, sort of external shocks that put us back to zero each time that we make some progress, not problems that we have created alone. And this is what requires new forms of global governance.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Je pense.
Thank you very much. Now, talking about the current situation, African countries and the BCAO countries are facing challenges. We've been talking about inflation hovering around 7% at BCAO. Our countries are facing high price of energy products, and food products have increased, and so import rate has increased significantly. Several countries are to massively provide grant to avoid impact on low-income populations. Furthermore, challenges in developed countries that led to worsening conditions on the market, as such that the cost of debt has increased significantly. That weigh heavily on African countries and BCAO countries. Worse still, countries that used to go on the market to mobilize resources and fund their development program, as we speak today, they can no longer do that, because it is quite impossible. In BCAO countries, 2021, 2022, regularly countries have been going onto the market. 2022, zero country. 2023, zero country. This has cost implications. So how do we ensure that countries deal with the difficult situation? international organizations, the Bretton Woods, IMF, MEGA, adapt the instruments to support countries facing serious challenges. When the Secretary of State of the United States made a statement, he asked a question, facilities of the IMF, resilience facilities, IFC to be very dynamic with the private sector, MEGA and so on. They need all this. Better still, now the pandemic came with difficulties. We came up with recommendations. We, the developing countries, African countries, and BCO countries, we receive about 2.3 billion US dollars. We said this was insignificant because we don't make decision. We just took what was given to us as a result of that decision. And we even agreed on the principle that there will be about 100 billions that will be paid to enhance the resilient funds that will assist development banks in the region to fund and allocate loans to the private sector. Up until now, that facility is nowhere to be found. That's the need for changes so that we, in concrete terms, address these matters systematically. That issue of climate, I fully agree with you. My friend Carlos, they are asking us to take measures to make efforts for things that we have not been responsible for, the amount we agreed upon about 2 weeks ago in Sharm el-Sheikh. That was marginal, a drop in the ocean. But better still, we are not sure this will be mobilized. There are a whole lot of reforms, major reforms, that need to be introduced. This is due to our voice in those institutions. Our voice are not heard. We don't have strong voice. We don't have the capacity to mobilize stakeholders and get involved in the decision-making process. The situation is very difficult for our countries. It is important to take strong action, but concrete, speedy actions that makes it possible for these countries to come out of that difficult situation. I thank you.
Thank you very much for and to update you, the rate of inflation in Ghana is down 40%. So since you last saw that number, it's gone up again. And, you know, to continue from where my previous speakers left off, I think that one has to put everything in context. I mean, you're looking at a country that did all the right things in getting access to international capital markets, you know, putting the public finances in order, running a strong monetary policy framework, opening up our markets, and trying to get integrated into global capital markets. Ghana was one of the first countries that had access to the international capital market in 2007 when we first issued the sovereign bond. So we are closely integrated into global markets. And then we started getting the shocks, the pandemic. You know, after the pandemic, you find yourself in a situation in which your vulnerabilities have increased. Fiscal debt has gone up, inflation has gone up, policies were accommodating, and all of us had to reduce our policy rates in order to protect growth and protect human lives. And then suddenly we find ourselves in a situation where at the time when your fiscal situation had deteriorated very badly, you get a credit rating downgrade, you get a shock from Russia and Ukraine, and then the advanced economy central banks start tightening their macroeconomic policies, including the Fed funds. And when that happens, you end up being at the receiving end of those kind of tighter policies. You see your capital flowing out of your economy, and your currency depreciates, which more or less heightens your vulnerability. So you find yourself in a situation that you're literally exposed, your debt burden becomes even more problematic, you're experiencing high inflation, and you get into a crisis. And when you find yourself in that situation, where do you go? So as usual, we all head to Washington and expect to get assistance from these international financial institutions. But they are not configured to provide the type of liquidity that you need. I mean, if you take the case of Ghana, we went to the fund as far back as June, and we are still talking and trying to, reach an agreement with the fund. Meanwhile, on a daily basis, your currency is depreciating, inflation is going up, there is more capital leaving the country. So really, how do you get these institutions to be more agile and more responsive, to the needs of African countries? I think this is where we are. There are issues about the governance in the IMF in terms of the voting rights and representations there that has to be looked at. There are issues concerning whether there are regional financial arrangements that, could come in to help deal with some of these situations. And even in the cases of countries that are facing crisis in terms of, debt workouts, there's really no internationally agreed frameworks for resolving, debt issues. I'm sure that our colleague from Zambia will tell you how long it's taking them under the common framework to reach a certain level of progress in addressing the debt issues. We are also currently facing similar challenges, and we are really not interested in going, using that common framework to address the challenges that we face. So yes, I mean, I think that the need for some changes at the global level, I mean, apart from the G20, where we do not belong. This is where the big discussions take place at the G20, the Financial Stability Board. Not many African countries are represented there. So really, I think that the effort should be in reforming these institutions in Washington, that's the IMF and the World Bank, and get them to be a little bit more responsive, improve the resources that are available to them to be able to support countries such as ours. Thank you.
Thank you for your very exhaustive answer, Dr. Edison.
Yes.
Yes, we can go with you now, with your thoughts.
Sure, thank you. And I really agree with what my colleagues have said. I don't think there's much to add in terms of what we expect in the changes of the governance of the global institutions, especially when we talk of global institutions, we're looking at the two Bretton Woods institutions. But the question is, do we expect to see changes happening? I know we've been talking about changing the quota system, where I think Carol said, these institutions were established more than 70 years ago, and the world order at that time has completely changed to where we are today. But they're not willing to change the quotas of these institutions, and therefore they remain with the voice to determine what happens globally. Take an example. Last year, when they increased the SDR and the IMF, still those who didn't need it are the ones who benefited in the lion's share. So we got peanuts that try to help us deal with our challenges. Today they have come up with the Resilience Trust Facility as bits of what they got from this SDR increase. So we appreciate the efforts that have been there since the COVID crisis hit us, but it's not really going to give us a lasting solution. Maybe we seated here as Africans, instead of challenging the global order, why don't we challenge ourselves as Africans? What can we do better as Africans to alleviate our problems, Today, when you look at the resources we go to borrow from outside, a big chunk of that is coming from Africa. We invest it at 1% or 0 point something percent, and we go and borrow it at 7%, 6%, 8% with a lot of restrictions. So how can we set up mechanisms, African channels that can help us to deal with our challenges? Today, my colleague is giving an experience where they are as Ghana. Who does these ratings? These are these global institutions. And as Africa, they just look at us as risky. Whatever happens, is our risk is always high. Anything's happening small like that, like Ghana, it's just completely shut off the international market. So while we are trying to put pressure on the international order, on the global order, it's unfortunate that we are not able to put our house in order, and I think that's where the lasting solution is.
Thank you. I love the word, your sentence. We have to challenge ourselves as Africans, and I think this is the start. Thank you for those words, and I will get your opinion now. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for the invitation to be part of this panel. The beauty of speaking last is that you can say, I agree with all what my colleagues have said. But I think I'll just add one or two dimensions. One of the things I think as African countries we have been facing is infrastructure has been a challenge. So like my colleague from Ghana said, one of the reasons why we went to the global market was to raise money to build our infrastructure. But as we are doing that, things shifted. There are commodity price shocks. For us, it goes back to 2015, the end of the commodity super, when the prices of commodities dropped. But therein also lies something which resonates with what John has said. How long are we going to continue to be commodity producers? You know, having had the privilege of participating in some of these international negotiations for raising money, like under AIDA, it's quite humbling when we go begging for money to these other countries. You see very small countries flexing their muscle in the name of solidarity to put in what they can. And when you look at ourselves, we do have a lot of resources. That's one thing which is a fact. But how are we using those resources? How are we benefiting from that? I think there is one area we need to look at very seriously. More recently, we are also rebuffed, for example, under COVID-19. Under COVID-19, this time around, we had the money through Afreximbank, but what happened? We couldn't get access to the vaccines. So that also points to the fact that really it's time that we started to looking at ourselves differently. My colleague has mentioned in the case of Zambia, we are one of the 3 African countries which are in line to get support under the common framework, the G20 common framework. The other 2 are Ethiopia and Chad. But there are many others who are waiting for that opportunity. We started with the DSSI, which is the Debt Service Suspension Initiative, but that came to an end in December 2021. But we are fortunate, in December, we were able to reach a staff level agreement, which was a prerequisite to getting an IMF program. That dragged on. How that was dragging on, Ukraine-Russia war broke out. The focus on us changed. So, but, as my colleagues have said, these institutions are capable of changing rules if it is in their interest. Rules changed. We saw help, not that we are begrudging that others should get help, but we too are part and parcel of that process. We need to be looked. It took almost 8 months, actually 8 months, to get an ACF, which we got in August this year. But now, the next phase, which is really getting the debt restructuring, is again stalling. Meanwhile, the pressures that everybody else is facing are also on us. The issue of tightening financial conditions, they are adding other pressures as the dollar strengthens, debt service goes up. Then again, with the low demand, it means again our commodities we are exporting can't fetch enough. So we are caught up in that cycle of pressure after pressure. So this is why I think what my colleague here said resonates, that when will we come to a point that we need to do something for ourselves? Because we have the resources, but how are we benefiting from that? It's, in fact, others who are benefiting. Climate change, colleagues have said it. We are less polluters, but we are on the receiving end. We don't even get the much benefit from the forests that we have, which are helping, but we have to bear the burden of adjusting. We have some of the resources to do energy. Look at our countries. Many of our countries, access to energy is very low. You know, some is as low as 10%. But we have coal. We say, no, don't touch it because it's going to. Then we are talking of universal access to energy. All these are matters, I think, which are pointing to us as a people. So meetings like this, I think, are meetings which help us to ask ourselves, what do we need to do differently? As we participate in these multilateral institutions, our voice, as has been pointed out, is weak. So how do we, outside that framework, if we can, do something that will help us move? Meanwhile, we have a young population. Pressure is mounting in terms of our youth unemployment. So all these are issues. Behind that, there are opportunities. But why is it that we are not seeing the opportunities and others are seeing them? That's the question I ask myself. Thank you.
There's a certain phrase that would essentially go a bit like, you know, the first shall be the last shall be the first. So my next question on currencies comes to you, Dr. Kalkala. Okay. Out of all the countries that you represent on the panel, I believe, you know, the Zambian kwacha is probably the outlier among all the currencies that we're discussing here. Up about 2% against the American dollar. The cedi's taken a bit of a hit, over 50% down against the dollar. The Egyptian pound devalued twice, I believe, this year, down around 56%. The CFA franc down around 10%. The Naira, you know, it's trading at around 444 in the formal market. Parallel rates are much higher, around 800 or so. The fact of the matter is that trying to manage a currency in the environments you're all dealing with is a bit like trying to sail straight into a cyclone. Best you can do is hold on and hope that the ship doesn't blow out. But do you have room for maneuver as central bankers? Given all the factors that you mentioned, rates are going up in the ECB, across the pond in the United States. Do you have room for maneuver?
That's a tricky one. Room for maneuver is hardly there, because what it is, many of our countries here are open, small economies in the scheme of things. So really, the spillovers which are coming from there hit us very hard. Now, in our case, we have been fortunate that when you look at the composition of inflation, much of it is food-driven, and to a large extent also exchange rate-driven. But as my colleagues have said, that sentiments are many times stuck against us. But in this particular case, we're a bit fortunate, unlike others, but you have to go back a bit in time to see where we are coming from. Because, as I said, from 2015, we had a lot of pressures. I remember in 2015, I was sitting in my office and watching at the screen how the exchange rate was moving. It was like a speed dial on a car, you know, so I said, what's going on? And suddenly, inflation also went up. So we struggled to do that. We are able to get it down to single digit. Then other shocks came by. That also went up. Now, one of the problems for us, which was big, was fiscal. Fiscal was very problematic. We kept saying, actually, in our statements about the challenge that we are facing from fiscal and the debt service. That's how come, I think, in 2020, we ended up defaulting. So I think that was the climax, if you will. Once we defaulted, obviously nobody was looking at us. We stopped getting any external flows. So we had to turn to our domestic market, and our domestic debt also went up. But now, when the wind of change in our economy came about, I think there was that enthusiasm and optimism that things were going to change. So suddenly, we saw an inflow of portfolio investors just before August elections that we had. And that helped to push the kwacha into an appreciating mode. So that appreciation has lag effects, which we have continued to enjoy. Fortunately, too, our agricultural production was in surplus, so we didn't have to import much of the food we need. So that those two put together did help to change the direction of the kwacha. But there is underlying pressure, especially now with the tightening of financial conditions. We find that the portfolio investors are not rolling over. They are not even using their coupon payments to invest in them. So pressure is mounting. That's why I think for us, this resolution of the debt is extremely important. We could have done better, actually, if, one, we didn't get the Ukraine-Russia problem, which pushed prices of fuel globally and the food. Because in the neighborhood, we also looked to for supply. We could also have done better if the debt restructuring moved faster than has been the case. So that's how I think we find ourselves in that fortunate. And then we also, the confidence, I think, is an important factor into this. Once the population has some confidence and clear communication on what is going on, it helps to anchor some of the expectations that they have.
Indeed. Governor Ogomba, in Rwanda's case, do you have room for maneuver?
Yeah, I think in our case, we are not yet in a really bad situation in terms of the foreign exchange or depreciation. But I think at the end of the day, it's that's why we are there as economic managers or central banks. We are there to deal with such difficult situations. It's not, we don't expect that every day will be a Sunday. We know there will be difficult situations like this. But I think with the right economic management tools, as we said, an open foreign exchange market allows the currency to balance itself to equilibrium if with proper management you avoid speculative forces that will artificially depreciate the local currency. So if there are really economic fundamentals pushing, that is expected in the challenges we live in as we manage this economy. The fact that we were able to weather through the COVID period that was really difficult with the economy shutting down, there always going to be short-term pain, but the long-term, we are going to weather through this. So I have confidence that we are going through difficult times, but we have tools to deal with the times we are in, and we are going to weather through this with some pain, but not destroying the economies as such. Thank you.
Governor Addison, I mean, Ghana's, dealing with some pretty serious pressure on the FX front. Given everything that you have to deal with, inflation at 40%, the debt restructuring to come, do you have any room for maneuver in there?
I think we've always had room to maneuver, and the vulnerabilities have been there. If you look at the history of the currency, the Ghana cedi has been relatively stable over the last 3 years. In fact, in 2021, the whole year we didn't record depreciation in excess of 5%, right? So coming into 2022 with a fiscal problem where, you're not able to borrow to finance the budget, you're literally cut out of the international capital markets. Meanwhile, you have to continue to finance your oil imports. You have to continue to service debt. That's a shock, a big shock to the economy. And you add on top of that, the shock from Russia and Ukraine. You add to that the shock from countries exiting from accommodative policies to tightening policies. It's like shock after shock after shock. This is really what we have seen. So how do you, in that kind of environment, guarantee currency stability? So I think the case of Ghana is unique because we are going through a fiscal crisis, we are going through a debt crisis on top of all the other challenges that other countries are also experiencing. It's becoming very clear to us that if we are able to successfully deal with the fiscal issue, and we've just had a budget, read, which attempts to stabilize the fiscal situation. We have made significant progress, in terms of the debt discussions. So we expect that, once we get this debt thing over, we should be able to lift that burden of the fiscal accounts. And that would also mean giving the balance of payments some breathing space, because the pressure in terms of the debt servicing outflows will go down, and that should help, give us space to manage the currency, better than we currently find ourselves doing. But I think that we are hopeful that by the end of the year, we should be reaching some agreements which would help, address some of the other factors that are playing out in the value of the currency, such as the rumors, the speculation. Oh, there's going to be a debt restructuring. Oh, you're going to lose money. Oh, get rid of your bonds and buy dollar. All of these things are feeding into the depreciation of the currency. And then you also have the feedback from the currency depreciation into the inflation level. So this is really almost a circular flow of vicious cycle of speculation and affecting exchange rates and inflation. But we think that we are at the end of it.
There's a bit of light at the end.
There's a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. Thank you.
Governor Kassimbu, CFA has done relatively well compared, to other parts of the continent. But even in that context, rates are still going up. The dollar is just steamrolling everyone in its path. Do you have room for maneuver?
Yes, I think, je pense que...
Yes, I think that our system our forex that is fixed has allowed us to maintain or contain the rise in the various crises. It's true that dollar's depreciation there is about 15%. There is CFA got depreciated of for about 15%. It increased the inflationist pressure through imports, and we were able to contain at least the inflation of 2022 because it was supposed to be about say 7 or 8%. We were at 3.6% last year. So we think that with our instrument of liquidity management, we will be able, if we don't have other shocks that are unpredictable, of course, that will come into play, we will be able to control inflation in the short and medium term. It is also very important for us to underline, and I think that was addressed by one of the speakers. We must address the issue of public finance, the efficiency of economy. I think is linked to the efficiency of the budget policy. It's true that we are at a level where budget, and I think it is in all developing countries, budgets is under huge pressure because energy has risen, food also, and we have so many pressure, and we must do everything that this aspect is taken into account when we're talking about budget to limit the social impact. So in the medium term, we need a convergence in the various budget in certain standards of convergence agreement. This will allow us to have more efficient budget policies. I think this is very important. And another item is very important, I think, is much more global aspect. It comes back to the first question that was asked. I think that it is abnormal that today we will pay bills, import bills that are high on food. Till today, let me tell you that this question must be settled by sectorial policies that are adapted. It is not normal. We have the land, we have water. Even in areas where rain is not falling, we have rivers. We need to produce what we are consuming, at least when we talk about food, of course. And now when we talk about balance of payment, we have bills of food that is excessive, and it is impacting our currencies that we can use to finance other development activities. I think these are things that we can manage. We can master them as countries. We can put in place agricultural production policies that will prevent us from importing some items to feed the population. Even concerning energy, we have huge potentials that exist, and we must give them value. We are discussing this topic for years now. Industrialization. We are the only continent having in the balance sheet, we are exporting primary goods. That is history. It is against the primary goods. We can't develop ourselves. We will be depending on the foreign countries when we continue importing primary items. We are talking about industrialization. We are addressing the issue for years. I think there is a summit on industrialization going on in Niamey, I think, for African Union, and I think it is very important to implement the various recommendations for us to do less export of primary goods. I think that's it.
Mr. Lopez, I'm going to come to you for this on this specific topic. One of the first things I remember the Kenya Central Bank governor saying in his, I believe it was his first press conference after he was appointed. And he gave this analogy of, monetary policy with rates where they are, having its foot flat on the brake, but fiscal policy with its foot flat on the accelerator. And it seems like that is a sort of contradiction that a lot of the policymakers we have across the continent are facing at the moment. In that sort of context, given everything we've spoken about, the external exogenous issues and the internal ones, is there really room for maneuver, or will currencies just, inevitably go down?
Well, of course, if we just listen to what the governors said, it's very clear that we have a problem of structural transformation of our economies. If we don't industrialize, if we don't formalize the economic exchanges. And
we're still importing a lot of our food.
We are going to be trapped into an interpretation of basically comparative advantage theory that is very simplistic and static, which is you export commodities because that's what you have. You are in a colonial trap because that's what we used to do during the colonial times. Today, the statistics say 80% of our exports are still commodities, 40% fossil fuels, and that's it, without transformation. If we have that kind of dependency, we are obviously going to depend on a number of very negative external shocks. One of them is that we don't control the prices. Second is that we import processed goods, and those processed goods tend to have more value in times of crisis than commodities. And then third, and more importantly, we are gearing the entire economic structure to meet external obligations. And that's what we do. We meet external obligations. So we have to service debt. We have to make sure that we have a payment system that corresponds to a certain level of standards. And nobody's going to mention that, in fact, our economies are underfinanced. But let's just throw some figures so people really, can be under shock. The first is that our entire sovereign debt in the continent is equivalent to the debt of the Netherlands and Belgium. That's it. And then you look into what is the percentage of access to finance from Africa in relation to all the other economies. It's very, very low. So despite all the drums about, for instance, support for the pandemic, what we got out of the IMF allocation for the pandemic was 5%. So Africans are always clobbered for not doing the right macroeconomic policies and all that, but in fact they are underfinanced. Even when you look into the historical levels of concessional lending that have been, much talked about over the last few years, it's absolutely true. It's historical levels. But what is not mentioned in the same sentence is that our GDP has more than doubled. Therefore, in percentage terms, that historical levels is less than what we used to get. The same when you say that, the ODA has increased. Yes, it has increased from 50 billion to 53 billion. In the meantime, the population has more than doubled, and, and the economies have doubled. So what is the percentage of that kind of contribution? So we are underfinanced. And because we are underfinanced, we have to interrogate ourselves, which is what Governor Kasibru is mentioning. We have to interrogate ourselves. What is it that we haven't done ourselves? And part of it is that we have geared our fiscal policy, now responding to your preoccupation, we have geared our fiscal policy to meet just the external obligations rather than creating a space for real transformation. For instance, how many exemptions do we give for companies that are actually quite wealthy? What are the measures that we have put in place against illicit financial flows? Every day in Africa, there is $246 million that leave the continent thanks to illicit financial flows. Every day. So it's really a problem of how we govern these critical issues. In a country like Nigeria, if you have 7% fiscal pressure, it tells you the story. How can you manage economy and have the space if you only have 7% of fiscal pressure? So yes, there are lots of issues that are externally provoked, but they have the effects that they have because of the things we don't do ourselves. We have to be much more capable of agency in negotiating better deals for Africa, for sure, because we are being shortchanged over and over, but we cannot really remiss to mention that we are not doing the right things ourselves. And that's, you know, the balance that we need to bring to the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Lopez. So you may laugh a bit because it's always good to have paper. I've run out low battery with my phone, and my question is on my phone. So I need you to help me. This is technology, I'm sorry. So, but maybe I can take your phone because I send it to you, yes? Or you want to ask me?
Well, this is where the broadcast side of business comes in.
This is a Rama affair, sorry.
Okay, so the question is this. In a context where mobile money and cryptocurrencies, it's been a topic virtually from day one. I had that discussion with Ade at the very start of FE 2022. In a context where mobile money and cryptocurrency allow for greater financial inclusion and shared prosperity, how can central banks and the banking system allow for new fintech to emerge and fill the gap with adequate support without stifling the development of the latter with rules around, say, Basel III, for examples? How can we deploy these tools to help Africans and African economies to grow?
Want to start?
Thank you. I can say just one thing because you mentioned Basel III, and it's a bit of a provocation. Because what Basel III has done in terms of unintended consequences is that it has created so much due diligence and so many rules to protect commercial banks, mostly in well-off countries, because of the problems they created with their sort of wild innovations, like
in 2008,
like derivatives and so on. Yes, stress tests, all this have been tightened. The consequence has been that international banks mostly left Africa, and that most of the commercial banks in Africa cannot really fulfill most of the conditions of Basel III. So it was not the intended objective, but that's the result. And it's just a point that we have to be part of the discussion, not just on crypto, not just on technological advances, but also to protect our interests, because sometimes these decisions are made, G20 and others, we are not there. Yeah, it's only South Africa that is a member, which is a bit bizarre because the largest economy is Nigeria. But that's it. That's the situation.
Thank you, merci. Non, je crois que je pense qu'il faut.
Well, I think that we need to make a distinction here. The issue regarding the mobile money and the issue regarding the crypto assets. The crypto assets. Digitalization and all the activities of the mobile money are important because, you know, they allow us, first of all, to have an extension of the financial services, whether saving services, payment services, transfer services, to a greater chunk of the population. And we also have mobile money services that help to have a very important reduction of the cost of the activities for those who have low income people, and also a more increased transparency because it goes through electronic channels and it's better secured. So I think that the central bank
or the BCAO, the Central Bank of West Africa, we are really committed in this process because we can do without it. And this is also contributing to achieve one of the major objectives, which is financial inclusion, which means that we have to go beyond the banking system to really reach out to low-income people, a greater democratization of access to financial services. And to me, this is crucial. And with the reforms we engage in at the level of the central bank, particularly with the approval of the e-money or mobile money, either that we grant to fintechs or banks today, because we've defined our financial inclusion strategy. That was back in 2016. By the end of 2021, the rate of financial inclusion moved from 45% to 67%. And this increase was greatly due to the openness that we had with the use of the mobile money, so the e-money. So this is something that we need to continue working on this. And by the way, at the Central Bank, we have so many projects in this regards. Issues of interoperability. We have a bureau of monitoring and to support the fintech that can come and test the product before they disseminate those and scale up those products at the Central Bank. We're also working on a digital money, Central Bank digital currency, CBDC, to complete all the array of the digital currency regarding everything we're doing globally. Now, there is something that we need to take into consideration here, and we don't say that much, is that gradually, as we are extending the scope of all these instruments today, the digital currency, we need to make sure that there is a proper and fit for purpose regulation taking into account some key objectives. The first one, it's fight against frauds and money laundering, because gradually as you open up, unfortunately there are some people that are bad ideas. They can use those channels for money laundering, so we need to fight against that. And again, we need to make sure that these instruments will help to secure the users. We need to protect. This is our role as a regulator, to work in such a way that any time we have a payment mechanism which is used, the user is well protected in this mechanism. And of course, we need to be careful regarding cyber security as well, cyber crime. These are crucial elements as well. Yes, this is a very huge opportunity. We need to extend that. We need to regulate that with appropriate regulation, taking account all these sets of protections and also protecting the users. Thank you. Because what we want, ultimately, we want an inclusive financial system, performing in a system, playing its role of supporting the economic and financial activities and also financing the economic activities. But the crypto assets, this is a different ball game. Yeah, for us, these are crypto assets. It's not money per se. These are crypto assets that are risky, with a high level of volatility, and if some are using it, it is at their risk. So, as financial assets, we have all the risk, inherent risk with financial assets, but we're working on an aspect since it's really in the landscape, we have it in the landscape, so we need to put in place a regulation. A regulation needs to be put in place that will be consistent, that will be objective, and also taking into account all the risks that the sector of those crypto assets and crypto asset sector, the risks that they can generate. This whole, I would like to say, we need to make the distinction, a clear distinction, of course, between the digital currency that brings a direct contribution to the financial sector and a crypto asset, their financial assets, risky assets that can be used by stakeholders. We regulate them, but they are not money per se. Thank you.
E-money, mobile money gets a thumbs up. Crypto asset, probably not. Thumbs down. Governor Anderson.
I cannot but agree with you on that. I mean, we had an attitude towards cryptocurrency where we had, told the Ghanaian public that this is not legal tender. It's not within a regulatory purview. So if you get involved in crypto assets and you lose money, you're on your own. This is what the central bank put out there. But it's becoming clearer that it's not going away. I mean, our youth are very much interested in cryptocurrency. I think some of the data that we are seeing suggests that it's more prevalent in Ghana than we think. I think that we are one of the first 20 countries in the world in terms of the numbers that was recently released. So we are beginning to look at it again to see whether we can bring in some regulation. You come to Accra, you see billboards, Bitcoin, Binance, all of them are advertising in the city. So we also have to be careful that we don't get caught, unprepared. And therefore, we are looking at the regulations for it. But this month, I'm sure you've all been following what has happened in the US with the collapse of the FTX exchange. I mean, this was an exchange that was valued at over 32 billion. And within 10 days, it was completely wiped out. They found themselves with, liabilities of 9 billion, and they had liquidity which was less than $1 billion. I mean, these problems can be addressed with regulation. We see these things in the banking sector, but you cannot have this sort of mismatch in asset and liabilities in the banking sector. We have exposure limits. And when all these things are in place, I think that, the regulatory issues would help manage some of the difficulties with crypto. Coming to mobile money, I mean, this is an area where Ghana has made significant progress, and the issue of financial inclusion has been effectively addressed by mobile money. We have not only had interoperability among the three mobile money companies such that you can transfer money across the networks, but we also have interoperability with the banking system itself so that you could have money move from bank accounts to mobile wallets and even from bank accounts to certain card schemes. So that's the extent of inclusion that this sort of thing brings you. I mean, people who are remote from banks, who have never had a bank account, could automatically, have a bank account just because of that interoperable arrangement that has been put into place. So looking at how Ghanaians had embraced mobile money, for us, it was very easy to look at the concept of a central bank digital currency. It's the same. I mean, it's digital money. The concept is already known to the people. They know what it means to have, money denominated in digital form. And this is what CBDCs are about. So we partnered with, our German technology partners, and we went very far to design an ECD. In fact, we have run a pilot in both the urban areas in the country and then even the rural areas, and created this token-based retail CBDC. Retail-based CBDC means that you can use the commercial banking system. Individuals do not have to have accounts at the central bank. So we maintain the role of the commercial banks in the financial intermediation. And the feedback that we got, this was in some of the remotest parts of the country, where the people were very, very much interested in the product. Those that, participated in the pilot were issued with a certain amount of ECD on a card. They enrolled merchants to participate in it. A lot of them exhausted the monies that had been loaded on the cards for them to, use, and even went and used their own resources to try to top up, to be able to use the ECD for transactions. The feedback is that the people trust the central bank. Once they know that this is a product that is backed by the central bank, the acceptability, improves. It works in both online and offline mode, so you don't need electricity or even telecommunications network for it to be used. This is what makes it really very revolutionary. So it's not only in the urban areas, but also in the rural settings. The Ghana CBDC has proven to work. We are yet to move into implementation because there are commercial agreements with the technology partners, which we are still discussing. And then also, we've run into these major macro issues with the value of the currency, which sort of has shifted.
Any chance that might happen in 2023? Formal launch, maybe?
I think that it is best to do these things during a time of stability, and we don't have that stability now.
Okay, so we'll wait.
We'll wait and see. Yeah.
All right, fair enough. Governor Ngomba.
To be sincere, I think my colleagues have said almost everything about the need for regulation, and what I can just add is that we central banks, apart from being regulators, we are economic managers, and we've been pushing. For us, for example, in Rwanda, we did what we call the cashless campaign to educate people about going digital and reducing cash, because it has different advantages in terms of financial inclusion. Financial inclusion is not just about payment, transfer money between individuals, but mainly on increasing savings, increasing digital loans, small loans. At least when you look at the number of people that have access to loans through digital channels, is more than double the traditional channels we've had. So there's a lot of advantages with the digitization of the financial transactions and assets. So we are interested in promoting this, but in a safe environment. At the end of the day, it's when there's no safety, even this benefit we see will be lost because there will be no trust. So we have to assure the population, we have to assure the users that these channels are reliable and they're trusted. That's how we can promote the use and this financial inclusion. So we are not being overcautious. We are doing what is right to be done, and it is a responsibility we have as regulators to go with the change that is there. So we are also challenged to keep on building our understanding in terms of human capacity, in terms of the regulation, in terms of the systems we're using. So we are not just there dormant and really against innovation. No, if anything, we are interested in innovation and we're promoting innovation, but in a safe environment. Thank you.
Dr. Kaliale.
Thank you very much. Just also to add on from our perspective, if there is one thing we can cite as having been very positive coming out of COVID-19, I think it's mobile money in our case, because we have seen quite a lot of progress in terms of financial inclusion, and I think we are carrying that momentum. As my colleagues have said, I think we are also looking at this phenomenon of CBDC. We are not yet at the stage like others have, but I think that's the advantage of coming behind, because you can see what others are doing, because we are watching very closely what Ghana is doing, what Nigeria did. We have seen also, like our colleagues in Kenya, also they are following up that. So we are not far behind in terms of catching up what is going on. But I think the important thing is, what is the it that we are trying to achieve? I think for us, we are seeing this as part of financial inclusion. So like Rwanda, we have also gone on a cashless campaign to encourage people to use mobile money as much as possible. And the reaction, the response from the MNOs is quite phenomenal. They have all bought into the idea. The banks also have come on board. So we feel that that is moving us towards our objective of financial inclusion as we look at these other modes. I think as has been said about cryptocurrency, we are aware it's there, but as has been seen, we think that the risks are far outweigh the benefits at this point. So we need to really be cautious. We have issued a guidance not to whoever wants to do that. They are doing it at their own risk.
So you can jump into it, but as long as you're willing to lose your shirt, that's your problem.
That's your problem because, well, but again, you see, as the regulators, we are not far behind, because what happens in real life is that when something happens, even when we are not there, they will come, where were you? You know, so people do all these things, and when they get into trouble, they will come and say, the central bank, what were you doing? We see all these Ponzi schemes which are going on. People, we warn them, don't get into these pyramid schemes, but they still do.
Does it ever get tempting for you to just say, I mean, but we told you so?
There's a limit to which you can say it. You know, as a public institution, I think you have to do it in such a way that it conveys the seriousness of the message. So even if we prosecute people for doing these things, you find even senior people. So one of the things I think we have found ourselves is that financial education is for everybody. You know, we always think that maybe others like us who are here don't need financial education. To the contrary, we have seen that actually just shake even you, Rama, if you're here, tomorrow you find that your paycheck is not coming. You start going to these Shylocks in no time at all because you didn't quite plan. And we have seen that happening to a number of very senior people once they are off some steady flow of income. It happened even in the US when they closed government, you know. So, but allow me to say one thing about the closing.
Sure, go for it.
Yes. I think colleagues have said about, you asked the question about, do we have room for maneuver? I think looking at your question and what we are doing, I think the focus has been so much on the monetary policy, what can it do? But really, if we are to move forward, as Carlos has said, growth is very low in our countries. To just give a figure also in terms of the issue, say that we are working for others. In our case, when we had, before we defaulted, we found that, 90% of our revenue collected was going into debt service. Then we add the civil service pay and all that, we're over 100%. So where is that extra coming from? That means we have to borrow from somewhere else. Now, that is unsustainable because now we are outsourcing development, so to speak. Now, with the current arrangement which we have, the government has taken a serious measure, and this is what is benefiting us in terms of the exchange rate that you are seeing, along with the position we have put ourselves on monetary policy. So I think the interplay of these other policies is extremely important because looking for one tool to solve all these challenges.
So central banks can do something, but fiscal policy as well is just as important.
Yes, financial stability is a major factor for growth.
Right.
Financial price stability is also a factor for growth. So we are already playing that role, but others have also to step to the plate.
All right. I know we're running against the clock, but I do want to bring in some comment from the floor, especially with regard to the question around crypto. I'm not sure how many of us were present for our early morning session on cryptocurrencies. Mamadou Touré was a panelist on that particular panel. Your comments, sir?
No, I mean, first, thank you very much. It was excellent, and I'm actually, I would say, very pleased to hear what I heard. in terms of positions of a central bank, and especially about African central banks that appear not that completely aligned with global central banks, and it's reassuring. Now, if I could roughly summarize, right, from what I've heard, changing market conditions, basically there is 1 to 1.5, depends when China is in good shape or not, to fund Africa. Little room to maneuver, meaning limited funds or tough borrowing rate. Fiscal revenues that make it pretty complicated to effectively maneuver better. Trade deficit, because we don't transform our industry. Okay, so what this gave me, basically, is a concept of a fractal. Do you know what a fractal is? Exactly what you're going through is the same thing as the man on the street or the SME on the street is going through with banks locally. Why? Market conditions, fixed to, interest rates, variable do change, and they don't have that many banks to go to, right? Funders, they're very limited in terms of banks they can go to. Third, fiscal revenues, poor or low revenue GDP countries. Trade deficit, basically there's a struggle to make both hands meet. So the question or the comment I have, this is somehow linked to the fact that finance is centralized. Yes or no? Now, if you look at the historical cultural success of finance in Africa, it's based on decentralized finance. Tontine, Soussou, Stockfeld. And this decentralized finance model basically comes from the fact that you rely on the collective. And when you speak basically about digital currencies, I think you need to make a distinction between digital currencies and digital assets. Why? Have you heard of Wakanda? You surely have, I would hope so. Now, where it's very interesting is they're talking about something called vibranium. You know that very special mineral, right? That gives power. So there's a subliminal message in there. We are basically sitting on vibranium and go out there to beg for money. There's a problem. Now, the very digital asset that you're discrediting is the very technology that allows us today to value that asset underground. I'm a former World Bank. I have all my colleagues from IFC from many years ago here. Now, did you know that the World Bank, just take DRC.
Mamadou, excuse me.
No, I just want to finish on this one.
Yeah.
Estimated the underground resources of DRC at $46 trillion. If you digitize and tokenize those assets, maybe you won't have to go out there and run for capital because you would have a collateral where you could involve your local economy to participate through digital participation, which they can't do on mobile money.
So, Mamadou, the question then would be, do we need to tokenize it? Would you be willing to sit down with regulators?
And the question would be, right?
And actually work on them on those rules.
Yes. Why don't we effectively, to escape this poverty trap, to start tokenizing the underground assets and the assets that we have so that we could access fractionalized ownership using mobile for people to effectively access those assets, because you can fractionalize a gold bar, right? And why don't we work between central banks and fintech to effectively leverage on that wealth?
All right,
Thank you.
Joint work. Brilliant, got it.
Who want to answer at least one question, because you addressed many topics?
The Wakanda one?
No, I didn't hear a question.
Don't get me repeated.
So can you raise, please, one question so that one of the governors can answer you?
So basically, I think, why don't central banks and regulator embrace technology the same way as it was done for M-Pesa 15 years ago? Not to fight a new technology, but to embrace it and leverage on what Africa has best. To, for instance, at the time, bypass infrastructure and leverage on innovation creativity instead of frustrating it in order to really value our real assets and create wealth.
Okay, thank you.
Now I heard the question.
Yes, I've known you for 10 years now, so I know the drill.
Well, I think the central bank governors will respond with more acumen than I can, but I think there is no doubt African central banks have embraced technology. There is no doubt about it. Let's not forget, Africa is the leader on mobile banking in the world. The number of transactions in the continent is more than half of the world transactions. So there is no way we can say they have not embraced technology. Now, there is a difference between embracing technology and having sort of a step ahead in terms of regulatory dimensions that are required to basically create the safe environment that crypto is questioning. Because there is absolutely nothing from a technological point of view that crypto offers that other forms of digitalization are not already offering. What is different is that they don't pass through any regulation. That's the difference. Of course, that is an attraction. That has nothing to do with technology, in my opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Lopez. I think, well, we are running out of time. I'm sorry for that. So we have to go. Sorry? You wanted to answer?
All right. Well, I'm sure we'll have room for that conversation later, Mamadou. But just to wrap up very quickly in 30 seconds, we've been here for 2 days. We've had many discussions around what we need to do to get capital markets moving forward, to increase investment, to increase trade amongst ourselves. When we meet here next year, what do you expect from AFIS? Dr. Kaliale, let's start with you. 30 seconds.
No, I think first, this is very important in terms of the exchange of views that we have. I would like to see when we next meet, progress that we have progressed from where we were in terms of the stock market, how are we using it for our own financing in our markets. All this clarity on the issue of even for us, even the common framework moving forward so that other countries can get the relief that they are looking for. And this mobile money, I think we'll have better clarity in terms of where we are going. I think that will be quite uplifting when we meet next, that we can report progress. Thank you.
Governor Ongomba, for AFIS 2023, what's on your wish list?
Yeah, I think we've had really 2 productive days, very good discussions around what we do, and between us, regulators, economic managers, and the private sector, just the discussion we're having around this digital crypto in itself, that is healthy. We've been here explaining what we are doing, how we are supporting this, but our colleague is saying we are failing it. So next time when we come, we should be speaking the same language. We should be on the same page. I think that's very key, that we understand the need to see things in the same direction, because it's not them against us, it's us together finding a solution for our sustainable development agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Governor Kassipu.
Oui, merci. Je pense que...
Thank you. I think that next year, by God's grace, we're going to meet all together, and I hope that we'll go beyond questions that have mobilized us today, like the question of inflation. There is a phenomenon having costs. We must go beyond that. We must finish with that topic and then focus our various discussions on financing issues of our various economies. Of course, we must focus our discussions on inclusion, how, for instance, that sectors like microfinances electronic currency institution participate more actively to the financial intermediation, and that we may be able to see the various progress that we must have reached in terms of financial inclusion and digitalization. I think that these issues will be sources of satisfaction, because that will be a huge step going from a situation to another one. Let me discuss with my friend. Let me tell him that we are not combating fintech. We have a framework that we are discussing with various fintech in our ECOWAS space, and that is why it is enabling us to move forward and understand the preoccupations of each and every actor, and help us to adapt the regulations we are putting in place to allow all activities to get developed in a safe environment, and also to the benefit of all actors and the benefit of consumers. Thanks. I think that this summit has allowed us frank discussions, and with a high level of information that allow us to deepen dilemma, especially in a year that is tough and will continue next year. We will have so many challenges next year, but as governors has highlighted it, we have a canvas of questions that need solutions, and one of the solutions that we all have, probably next year we must go in details when it comes to implementation of the various ideas that we've shared during all our discussions in this AFIS summit in 2022. And also we're going to find a solution to our various opinions, and that is very important to improve the quality of services and the regulation, and in the end expect, like the governor Kasibro said it, that next year we wouldn't have so much difficulties in the external environment to allow us to improve in peace the quality of this industry that is paramount and creates value in African economies. Thank you, Mr. Lopez. So I think we're going to close. We don't have time. Thank you, Mr. Lopez. Thank you, Mr. Brew. Thank you, Mr. Gwangwang, the governor of Rwanda. Thank you, Mr. various panelists.
Thank you to my friend Rama, saving me at the end.
Merci beaucoup.